Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Unstoppable Mindset, where inclusion, diversity, and the unexpected meet. And we get to talk today about inclusion and diversity. And you never know, we may hit the unexpected as well, which is anything except inclusion and diversity. But our guest today is Lloyd Lewis, who is the CEO of the ARC Colorado Thrift Stores. And we're going to talk about ARC and the thrift stores and everything else under the sun and why he's doing it and all that. So I'm not going to talk much because that's his job. So, Lloyd, welcome to Unstoppable Mindset. We're glad you're
Well,
here.
Michael, it's great to be with you, and I really appreciate our opportunity to get to know each other and have a conversation.
Looking forward to it. Now, where in Colorado are you?
We're actually, I have stores across Colorado, from Fort Collins in the north to Pueblo in the south, across what we call our Front Range, and also on our western slope. My company's headquartered in Lakewood, Colorado, which is just a little bit southeast of Denver.
Okay.
We are all across the state.
I get to be in Littleton in May for the board meeting of the Colorado Center for the Blind in Littleton.
Oh, nice. Very cool. Littleton is a city very near to us where we have a store and a very successful operation, and it's a wonderful city.
Well, I'm going to have to make sure that when we're going to be there, that maybe we can at least meet in person.
That would be great. Please let me know when you're here
I
and let
will.
you
I
know.
don't remember the date, but I think it's around the 9th of May, but I'll let you know.
Maybe we could meet at my warehouse. We have a lot of wonderful blind call center agents there with adaptive software. They do an amazing job for us, and I think they would appreciate getting an opportunity to meet you and get to know you.
I may just stay an extra day or come in a day early to do that.
That'd be very cool. Very cool.
Well, in any case, why don't we start with you, if you would tell us maybe about kind of the early Lloyd growing up and all that.
Yeah, the early Lloyd grew up in Tacoma, Washington, and I have a lot of family there. And the early Lloyd moved around a bit, California a bit, Bakersfield, High Point, North Carolina, Oklahoma City, and I had a stepfather who was doing transfers as a FAA controller.
Ah,
And I grew up, doing well in school, in sports, and really appreciate where I grew up, where we could see Mount Rainier from my backyard. And we had covered playgrounds because it rained all the time. Not like the kind of rain you're getting now, but it rained a lot in Washington. And I actually like rain if it's the appropriate level, not the LA rain you got right now, but I have always found it refreshing.
you've had some snow this year.
We've had a lot of snow this year, and we had that this past weekend. We were expecting a couple inches. We got 8 or 9 inches, and we're having better weather right now as we're speaking. But this weekend we could get even more. So it's, I just wish we weren't getting so much of this because it interferes with my stores. If the roads aren't drivable, people aren't likely to be out on the road visiting my stores.
Yeah.
So hopefully it'll be milder than what they're predicting right now.
And just for a point of reference, we're recording this on February 6th, 2024. So that's why we're talking about rain and snow and everything else. And typically, a lot of the weather that starts out in California does go east and elsewhere. So it's probably going to be a follow up to the storm that we have here that you get. But
Right.
it's a very big storm, and that's why it's been so crazy out here because we've had so much rain since it's just stayed over us and dumped a lot of moisture.
We see it on the news media, and it's very, concerning. It's a lot of damage there, and power outages, and we in Colorado, we are, sorry this is the experience that you are having.
Yeah, well, and we will deal with it, which is cool. But at least we can, and the cities and the government is doing their best to try to keep up with it all.
Well, I hope they can. I hope they can.
So, you did you go to college in Colorado or?
I did not. I ended up going to undergrad at the University of Oklahoma in Norman, Oklahoma, and got a degree in political science.
Now, why did you go there as opposed to
I
staying
was
closer to
I
Washington?
was I was in high school at the time there.
Okay.
My stepfather had transferred to Oklahoma City because he was teaching at the FAA Academy, which is located.
Ah, yes.
And then when it came time to do my undergrad, I had some counselors who thought I should attend an Ivy. Instead, I followed my friends to Norman, Oklahoma, and that was my undergraduate education.
Then what did you do?
Then I followed a girlfriend out to Massachusetts. From there, I did a paralegal training program in Atlanta, then hired at the Tennessee Valley Authority in Knoxville, where I spent a few years as a paralegal,
Mm,
and applying for a paralegal job with an investment firm in Philadelphia, because I had never been in the big city in the Northeast. And I ended up, prior to grad school, being a municipal investment banker working on municipal financing projects, ultimately with Smith Barney, which was a
wow.
incredibly prominent firm at the time.
Yes. Did girlfriend follow you around or
No,
that didn't work, huh?
she did her own thing. She's done quite well. She went to do a PhD at Princeton in English
Mm,
and became a professor at the University of Mississippi, and a very successful career.
that's great. So did you ever find another girlfriend that took?
I did. I
Oh,
did.
good. Okay.
I found a few. And then from Philadelphia, we thought the 1986 tax bill would disrupt our industry. So I took the graduate management admission test, the GMAT application test for business school. I got admitted to Duke, to Michigan, to some other schools, and I
Oh,
chose
my
the
word.
University of Chicago, which is, you know, considered, I guess, the best business school in America per U.S. News rankings. And I did an MBA, graduated in '88 with a specialty in finance, and came out to Colorado in Boulder with IBM as a senior financial analyst in their executive training program. And from there, did a series of companies. I was director of finance for a publicly traded medical equipment company. I was a CFO for a high tech, ultimately sold to Micron. And then in 2000, the world changed. I had a little boy born with Down syndrome, whose name is
Mm.
Kennedy.
I'm sorry, his name again?
Kennedy, like the,
Kennedy.
and
Okay.
I got involved in scientific research advocacy. I met a neuroscientist at the University of Colorado working in that arena, and we partnered up and advocated at CU, University of Colorado, and across the country to try to get more funding for Down syndrome research. At the time, it really didn't receive much funding, and met a philanthropist's daughter whose father had founded Stars Encore. She has a little girl my son's age with Down syndrome. And we partnered up, and ultimately that family created what's now the largest Down syndrome research facility, the Linda Cernick Institute, named for the neuroscientist that I met and worked with initially on advocacy.
Mm.
My whole world changed with the birth of my son Kennedy.
What caused you to really decide to make that change and go away from being a financial analyst and being very successful in the corporate world to clearly something else? Just because of his birth, or did
Yeah,
things happen that changed your life? Or
yeah. When he was born, a lot of parents, if they have a child with Down syndrome, uh, you know, surprise them at birth, they might get anxious or depressed or angry or concerned. For whatever reason, none of that occurred to me. I just thought he was great, would always be great. And I immediately thought about trying to help Kennedy because people with Down syndrome and intellectual disabilities have a lot of challenges and obstacles. So I went to a personal development seminar. I announced my goal in life was to raise $25 million in Down syndrome research. And everyone applauded. And when I got down from the podium, I thought, holy smokes, I don't have money. I don't know anybody with money. And ultimately, the philanthropist daughter that I met, that family, world's largest Down syndrome research institute, gifted with 32 million from that family. So I'm
Mhm.
a big believer in pointing the bat to center field and, shooting for the moon, doing the moonshot. And A few years later, unfortunately, the neuroscientist who was my friend and partner passed away from an aneurysm.
Mm.
She was my best friend at the time. I took a hiatus from Down syndrome research and was recruited to ARC by a friend that I had at IBM. And I joined ARC May '05 as CFO, where I thought I could take my bills and help create funding programs that would help people like my son.
So tell me more about ARC, where
So
it came from, what it is, and so on, if you would.
ARC Thrift Stores was created in 1968 to fund ARC advocacy chapters who help people with intellectual disabilities find jobs, housing, medical services, and schools. It's affiliated with the ARC of the United States. The ARC of the United States was the first parent organization created in the 1940s to advocate for humane treatment in large institutions where people like my son were being abused. And had my son been born in the 1940s, we would have been into to an
Yeah.
institution. Forget about him. He won't walk or talk. Tell people he died. Don't tell people about him. But the ARC United States set about trying to create more humane conditions in these large institutions, followed by deinstitutionalization advocacy, mainstreaming inclusion, public education. People like my son now live with their families. They participate in their communities. And the ARC of the United States, with chapters all across the country, one of the top 10 charities in America, does direct services and advocacy all across the United States, including advocacy DC with Congress and people, in important departments of the U.S. government. So uh, the ARC chapters of Colorado, all across Colorado, 15 ARC chapters, work with thousands and thousands of families and kids and adults, and again, try to help them achieve goals that, a lot of us take for granted: how to find a job, how to find a place to live, how to get your medical needs cared for, how to be treated with respect in school. And in our world, as much progress has been made, you know, just through inclusion, people like my son have gained on average 20 IQ points, going from severe to mild impairment, moderate impairment to moderate to mild impairment. But still, there are tremendous challenges. 80% of people with 80% of women with intellectual disabilities will be abused, 40% multiple times, 40% of men. There's an 80% unemployment rate for people with intellectual disabilities, the highest in the country. There's an extreme shortage of housing and supports. There's a higher need for medical care. Schools still have segregated classrooms for people with intellectual disabilities. So a lot of progress has been made, but there's a lot of progress yet to be made that the ARCs are working on.
Now, is ARC today an acronym for something?
No, it's no longer an acronym. Back in
Is
the
it-
day,
yeah.
the word retarded, which is never used, was actually an improvement over previous descriptions like mongoloidism, etc.
Mm-hmm.
It's no longer acceptable.
Right.
It's just ARC.
It is just ARC today,
Legally changed our name, as did the ARC of the United States, as have all the ARC chapters across the country. It's
which
just ARC.
which is great and which makes perfect sense. And I've wondered that whether, and I sort of thought that that was the case. Well, my experience at being blind, going back to when I was born in 1950, doctors told my parents the same thing: send him off to a home because no blind child can ever grow up to be a contributor to society, and he's just going to be a drain on your family. And that was the tone and the trend at the time. It was even worse in other countries where they would just dispose of kids with disabilities when they were born.
Right. We have many blind friends in Colorado, and they've all had similar experiences growing up, challenges and obstacles, and our deep belief is that people with all disabilities, whether it's mental health, blindness, intellectual disabilities, physical disabilities, should be treated equally and afforded the same opportunities through education and employment as anyone else in society. And that's what we endeavor to do.
Being a little bit of a rabble rouser and troublemaker, of course, my position is every person in society has a disability. And for most all of you, it's the fact that you're light dependent. And if the lights go out and you don't, well, if the lights go out and you don't have a smartphone or a flashlight, you're in a world of trouble.
Yeah, I mean, everyone has issues of some type. I mean, whether it's they have, physical issues, or they have hearing issues, or issues related to aging, or mental health, or for some people it's alcohol, some people it's drugs.
Sure.
Uh,
But I really do seriously choose to believe that light dependence is a disability. The only thing is that Thomas Edison invented the light bulb, and now light on demand has become so ubiquitous that your disability is covered up, but it doesn't change the fact that it is things that most people have to contend with in some way or another.
well, thank you for sharing that. And you are absolutely correct. If to do anything in our household before we go to sleep, we're dependent on light.
Mm-hmm.
And without light and without vision, I would be completely immobilized. So
Well,
I
and the reality is, of course, you don't have to be, but that's the way we mostly are brought up. And the result is that we keep talking about blind people as being visually impaired, which is so wrong on so many levels because we're not. We don't look different simply because we're blind necessarily. And the impaired is what some of the professionals in the field have made it, but impaired we're not. And it's really wrong for people to ever accuse anyone who has a so-called traditional disability, physical or intellectual, of being impaired, because that means you're really just comparing us to someone else, and that's so unfortunate.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's very profound, and that's very meaningful and impactful. So I thank you for sharing that.
But it is something that we all deal with in one way or another, and it's just kind of the way it is. So if we, in looking at a lot of all of this, what about DEI and people who are um, dealing with intellectual disabilities and so on? Um,
Well,
how do we?
intriguingly, I just came to this conversation from a meeting with my DEI director, who happens to be African American, and our senior staff of 10 plus individuals, talking about the importance of DEI with respect to people who have intellectual disabilities, respect to broadening the tent as much as possible across the company for people with various challenges in their own lives, whether they might be homeless, or they might be, uh, from poor economic backgrounds, or they might be immigrants or refugees or veterans or formerly incarcerated or Black or Latino or female, or we just, every every part of our society, we like to reach out to as much as we can to offer opportunities to be involved with us. We're a very diverse company. We've just produced our latest DEI report, and we believe that diversity makes us all stronger, that everyone's different in some way.
How do we get most people in society, however, to recognize that we're not including disabilities in the diversity discussion? If you talk to most experts about diversity, they'll talk to you about sexual orientation and race and gender and so on, and they won't deal with disabilities, physical or intellectual or developmental.
I think it's a matter of awareness. I think it's a matter of reaching out and having these discussions. I presented to a group of 200 or 300 CEOs last year about the importance of including people with intellectual disabilities in their DEI programs. I've spoken to national organizations. I've written a book. I'm at work on a movie with a film producer. And to me, I think it's a matter of we need to reach out. We need to bring this to people's attention. And we need to advocate for our communities to make sure we're included in DEI programs and discussions. I mean, the ones that people talk about are more than deserving. They're really deserving. But so are we.
Hmm.
We are no less or no more deserving than other parts of DEI programs.
Right.
We need to be speaking out on behalf of people with disabilities to make sure that we're included in these conversations and in these programs.
Well, and we need to teach and help people with disabilities speak out as well, because the reality is that we tend to be ignored. And it's so unfortunate. We're talking month in February about Black History Month and so on. In October, it will be Disability Employment Awareness Month and Disability Awareness Month, but you won't see anywhere near the visibility and the publicity and the talk about it, even though it's a larger minority than Black history or Blacks or African Americans or any of the other minorities that get recognized at one time or another during the year.
I think it's on us. I think it's on us to really speak out and, make sure we're represented, make sure we're included, make sure we're part of these conversations. And we need to bring this to people's attention and advocate just like other groups have advocated.
Mm-hmm.
And they're no less deserving or more than us, but it's really on us. It's on you and me and others, disability leaders and people with disabilities, to make sure that we have seats at the table.
Yeah. And I think that is a lot of it. We've got to get Congress and the states to do more to stiffen the laws and give us more of the laws that we need to have, even though it should be in our, to do so. We don't find that legislators work nearly as fast as they ought to on some of these things. For example, we're just seeing reasonable movement on a bill that would require medical devices to be accessible. We still have debates regularly in the states and even in Congress about the fact that while the Americans with Disabilities Act should cover the internet, and the Department of Justice finally said so, there's still a lot of argument about it. And the result, places say, well, I don't need to really make my website accessible because the internet didn't come until long after the ADA, so the ADA can't in any way involve the internet, which is a ridiculous argument, but yet it is what we encounter.
Well, that is a problem. And, if we can turn out 50 to 100 people to go talk to our legislators, talk to them session after session, day after day, week after week, we will get their attention and we will make sure that we get these kinds of issues. I chair 5 disabilities in Colorado,
Mm-hmm.
one of which is the Colorado Cross Disability Coalition, representing people with all disabilities. And the leader of that organization has become very prominent as an advocate. We have a policy aide for the lieutenant governor, who is my co-chair for that organization. And we are making big strides in Colorado, getting lots of good legislation, but there's still advocacy to be done. And we're
Yeah.
talking about creating a permanent disability office as part of the governor's cabinet. But again, it's on us to go after these issues, to get the attention of the decision makers, the legislators, the corporations, to make sure we're not ignored, to make sure that we're not back of the bus.
Yeah. It is a process, and there's been growth, there's been movement, but there still is so much more that does need to be done. And we also have to be proud of our own history and recognize that we've made a lot of progress, but there is a lot yet to do.
I am chair of something called the Atlantis Community Foundation, which was a sister organization of Atlantis Community Inc., which was the nation's second created independent living center, initially towards helping people move out of nursing homes and get independent living skills. And we manage 200 affordable apartments for people with cross disabilities. And part of the history of this organization is the formation of an organization called ADAPT, which you're probably familiar with,
Mm-hmm.
which does all kinds of advocacy nationally. Nationally has annual sit-ins and protests. Famously, in the 1980s, a gentleman, Wade Blank, who had marched with Dr. King, was in Denver, and he was a social director for a nursing home where he tried to create, fuller lives, more enjoyable lives for some of the residents. His reward was getting fired. When he got fired, he started suing, the nursing home, getting people removed from the nursing home, creating this independent living center. And one of the more notable actions he organized was something called the Gang of 19. 19 people in wheelchairs went out to a Denver bus stop. As the bus rolled up, they rolled in front. Some rolled behind. Another bus rolled up. They rolled behind that one. And that led to the first accessible buses in the country here in Denver.
Mm-hmm.
That spread out across the country. But Berkeley and Denver are two prominent centers of disability history in America.
A couple of years ago, I read an article that said that New York City, Manhattan, made a commitment that they're going to make, I think it was 95%, but it may have been even higher, of all subway stations accessible, which meant
Okay.
wheelchair accessible and so on.
Okay.
And I know, having lived in the area and been on a lot of those subway platforms, that is a monumental task, because some of them, I'll be interested to see how they create the space to put an elevator in to get people down, which is not that it shouldn't be done, but it was a pretty major commitment. And I gather it's moving forward, because I'm not hearing anything that's saying aren't moving forward with it.
Well, hopefully they fulfill that commitment.
Yeah.
It's again, as you say, it's very important to listen to our community, to make sure that we're included, to make sure that we have accessible means to live lives just like everybody else.
How does this whole lack in some senses, regarding disabilities, DEI, affect the civil liberties of people with disabilities?
Well, if you're discriminated against in employment, that is a financial impact that is unequal and unfair and very disturbing. There's a very high rate of poverty in our community, which needs to be addressed. And those are things that we are working on. And people need the ability to have equal opportunities employment. Similarly, in housing needs to be accessible. It needs to
Yeah.
be affordable. It needs to be available to people with disabilities. Medical care. There's higher needs of medical care.
Yeah.
So there needs to be more attention in Medicaid and other insurance programs to make sure the community get the kind of medical care that they deserve as human beings, as citizens who should be treated equally with everyone else. You shouldn't have to be rich to get medical care.
Yeah.
You shouldn't have to be without a disability in the way we think of disability to get appropriate medical care. Similarly, in schools, there's still segregated classrooms in
Oh,
schools.
yeah.
In the world of abuse, people with disabilities experience higher rates of abuse than others. In every aspect of society, we are hurting people with disabilities if they're not treated fairly and equally with equal opportunities.
We were talking earlier about the whole issue of becoming more involved in the conversation, and what you were just talking about reminded me of something. My wife, when she was alive, was in a wheelchair her whole life. We were married 40 years, and she passed in November of 2022. One of the things that she loved to do, and so she got me to watching it as well, was television shows like The Property Brothers on HGTV.
What is it called?
Property Brothers.
Okay.
And it's two twins then who will go renovate homes for people and so on, and they do build some. But the thing about it, and there are so many shows like it that are all involved on home and garden television with renovating homes, fixing up homes, and so on. I don't even though it would make sense to do, especially since we have an aging population, what I don't see is any of these people making a part of their vernacular or vocabulary or modus operandi, putting in appropriate things to consider the fact that somebody in the future who may get that home will have a disability. And so the result is we don't, you know, they don't do it. I think I saw one Property Brothers show where it was a wheelchair issue, or there was a person in a chair, but they don't do it as a matter of course, and it would make sense to do. And some architects will point out why it's sensible to do.
That's a very important point. Again, we need to be reaching out to the cable show producers. We need to be reaching out to the media. We need to be reaching out to networks, the streamers, Netflix, Amazon. We need to be reaching out to the builders associations. They can't ignore accessibility. Accessibility needs to be built in everywhere. And it's unacceptable to gloss over our community and not really listen to our requests for accessibility and inclusion. It's just not acceptable.
I suppose, and I hear what you're saying, and I don't argue with that at all. But I do suppose, on the one hand, where should people focus most of their attention? I know in the National Federation of the Blind, for example, while the whole issue of access in the way we're talking about for people in chairs and other people isn't quite the issue it really is, but at the same time, how do you decide where to focus your efforts?
Well, I am very involved in cross-disability advocacy. I'm very involved in affordable housing integrated for people with disabilities. I'm very involved in a state disability funding committee funding innovative disability projects.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on the ARC of the U.S. Foundation board, working in the arena of trying to assist them expand their funding capacity. I'm on an international board with members in 100 countries because as much challenge as we have in America, in some parts of the world, it's even extremely challenging and concerning and troubling. And I'm very involved in my own company in providing relief to our community and food to the food insecure and employment opportunities to marginalized populations. And we've hired hundreds of employees with disabilities in my company. Where one focuses, it is really dependent on one's primary and one's bandwidth. I am fortunate to be blessed with an ability to sort of, do a lot of things all at once. And so I try to do as much as I can in as much many different arenas as I can. But, whatever the primary issues are for the National Federation of the Blind, if that's one's main concern, go for it. Start reaching out to as many people as you can.
Yeah. Well, and they do. But I think that the challenge is for all of us so overwhelming, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be dealing with it. And one of the reasons it is overwhelming is that there are so many myths and so many poor attitudes and misconceptions about things like employing persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities or any kind of a disability. What are some of the kind of myths that you encounter every day, and how do you deal with some of those?
Well, in my company, it's relatively easy to deal with the myths because I'm at the top of the company. So we don't have the same barriers and challenges that employees face in other companies. We are completely accessible. We are completely responsive to the needs of people with disabilities who work for us. With other companies, it becomes more difficult because there are myths that it's going to be too costly, or there's going to have to be too many accommodations, or there are going to be safety issues, or legal issues, or what have you. My response to all of that is, we have to provide accessibility to all our employees,
Well,
accommodations for all our employees.
so
And it's no different to make an accommodation for a person with disability than it is for someone who needs some time away with their kids, or time away with an illness, or they need a flexible schedule, or they need some kind of medical support. We need to think about providing accessibility and accommodations for everybody, regardless of ability or disability.
well, here's another example, and one of the reasons I brought it up just to get to this point. So take the average employee who doesn't supposedly have a disability.
Right.
What does any company provide them with? We provide them, and I don't mean this in a facetious way, but we provide them with lights so that they can see to walk down the hall and go to the restroom and so on. We provide them with monitors and computers, and especially the monitors so they can see what it is that they have to do on the computer. We provide them with rooms that have coffee machines so they can get coffee and other things like that. We provide so many reasonable accommodations to the average employee, period, that why should it be difficult to provide specific accommodations for maybe a subgroup of those people? And the answer is, of course, it shouldn't be a problem. If I go to work for a company, instead of a monitor, because I'm not going to use a monitor, although typically computers come with monitors, but I need a screen reader to verbalize the information that comes across the screen. But I'll get the argument, well, but we didn't budget for that. And my response is, yes, you did. You provide what it is that people need in order to be able to access the information on the computer, just because what I use is a little bit different. A part of the conversation needs to be that we're providing lots of accommodations for everyone already.
Yeah, I completely agree. And in my own experience, it's no more costly to provide accommodations to people with disabilities than people who supposedly don't have disabilities. And it's just, there's not really an expense differential anyway. And
No.
even if there were, we need to treat people humanely and give them equal opportunity.
Well,
And
even if there were,
where are we at as a society with our morality?
Yeah.
If we don't help everyone who can use our support, what does that say about our society?
Even if there were significant differences in expenses, which there are not, but even if there were, the bottom line is that any company that is doing anything can figure out ways to offset those costs. But the reality is there aren't significant differences at all.
We now live in this world of artificial intelligence. We now live in this world of the cloud. We now live in this world of extreme technical advances, medical advances. Uh, there's really no excuse not to support everyone in society and give them reasonable accommodations. There's just no excuse.
And that's one of the reasons that I back to the concept of being called visually impaired, because impaired is such a negative term when you start to say anyone is impaired compared to anyone else. Everyone has impairments of one sort or another. And the reality is that we need to get that kind of concept out of our vocabularies, and at least out of our mindsets.
Well, again, I totally agree.
Yeah.
I totally agree.
So this is probably a little redundant, but what are some of the myths and fears that, and this gets back to the whole conversation about disabilities, and I think why we're not so much included, but what are some of the myths and that people typically have about all of us, and especially I think even more so with intellectual and developmental disabilities?
Safety, cost, legal accommodations, but we experience no, in my company, we have 450 employees with intellectual developmental disabilities, 450. Down syndrome, autism, cerebral palsy, all forms of types of developmental disability. My company's never been more successful. I got the company in year 37 when we were doing all of 2 million in earnings. We have had 17 of 18 record years, only interrupted by the COVID year. We're now doing 20 million in earnings. And I've hired 450 employees with developmental disabilities.
How old is the company today?
It is 55 years old.
All right. So in 18 years, look what you've done.
Yeah, and I attribute a lot of that to employing people with disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
Who love to contribute, love to work in teams, are very positive and inspirational to their fellow employees, and they just appreciate being able to be part of the workforce and do what the rest of us do. And to me, I would do it in any company. If I
Yeah.
were the head of IBM or the head of Facebook or Apple, I would do the same thing.
I would submit that one of the advantages of hiring a person with any kind of a disability who thinks at all would tell you, I'm going to be more loyal to you because I know how hard it was for me to get a job. And the very fact that you gave me a job is going to want me to stay there because you made me um, an offer, and in theory, you made me feel welcome. Why would I ever want to leave?
Our employees with disabilities are exploited.
Mm-hmm.
They hate to miss work. We could have 3 feet of snow on the road and they want to come into work. I have to order them not to.
Yeah, I
That
believe it.
applies to all of our employees with disabilities, our blind agents, our employees with intellectual disabilities, our wheelchair users. They are extremely loyal. And
The Colorado's, yeah,
any
go ahead.
company can benefit from their employment, period.
The Colorado Center for the Blind in Littleton has actually purchased an apartment complex where all the students reside, and they have to learn independent living skills, learn how to keep up the apartments, and so on. But they go every day to the center. So it usually means taking a bus. I think it's close enough that you can walk, but not during the snow. But again, people do the same thing. They're very committed to being there, to learning the skills that need to be learned, and they do whatever is necessary to make it work out, and that's what it should be.
Yeah, again, total agreement. You are
Yeah.
preaching to the choir.
I would add one fear that you didn't mention, and um, I'll say it and then I'll qualify it a little bit. The fear is become like you. I could get a disability. It could happen to me in a moment's notice. Having said that, the response is how often when we start to deal with fear, do we just worry about things to death that will never happen? The reality is most people won't become a
But
person with a disability in any way. Why are you worrying about it?
well, in the employment world, I agree with you. But as we age, more often than not, people
Sure.
eventually acquire some kind of disability, physical, mental, cancer, Alzheimer's, uh, as we age.
More of us will.
More
True.
of us will, not everybody. But I think part of it is not realizing that, you know, at at the end of our lives, most people are dealing with issues that they didn't deal with earlier now.
Sure.
And
And
so
they also
does
weren't prepared for that either, which is part of what society really needs to do.
so I think people need a deeper empathy and understanding of, people like my son are born with Down syndrome. And, they have typically uh, cognitive issues resulting in IQs less than 70, say.
Hmm.
And, it's not like they chose that life. It's not like, they didn't do things in their life to prevent that happening. My son was born with an extra chromosome, chromosome
Hmm.
21,
Hmm.
but he's a wonderful human being and he deserves the same kind of opportunities and treatment as everyone else in society.
Will he have a job somewhere?
He's already working part-time at one of my stores, and he's finishing his last year of high school.
Cool.
But I think people need to understand that a lot of people don't choose their so-called disability;
Hmm.
they're born with it. And people don't understand that later in life, most people will probably have some kind of issue they deal with, and how would they like to be treated later in life?
Right.
What kind of respect do they deserve later in life? What kind of treatment do they deserve later in life?
One of the wonderful things that happens at the Colorado Center that I've talked about before is that if you enroll there and become a student, if you are low vision as opposed to blind, that is totally blind. But if you have some eyesight, you will still do most of your work, your travel training, and so on, under sleep shades. And you will learn to do that as a totally blind person. And
But
the reason
so,
is
pardon me, but describe sleep shades for me. I'm not familiar.
sleep shades are the things that some people put on at night when there are lights. So it's basically
Oh, okay,
covering your eyes.
sure, got it.
Yeah. I forget the other terms that people use for them, but it's basically just so that you don't see any light.
Okay,
The reason for it is many people who enroll or matriculate into the center who have low vision are people who have retinitis pigmentosa or something else has occurred with them, and they will probably lose the rest of their vision. And the philosophy of the center is this is the time for you to learn all about blindness and really what blindness means. And by doing so, when you lose the rest of your eyesight, which is not to say you shouldn't use the eyesight you have, but when you lose the rest of it, which very well could happen, you'll already know what to do and you don't have a second psychological trauma and learn things all over again, which I think is so important because we teach people that blindness isn't the problem. And I think it's true with other disabilities as well. It's not the problem. It's our attitudes and our perceptions that are the real issue that we face.
yeah, I very much appreciate that kind of thought process.
It's pretty cool. One of the things that you have to do if you're going to graduate from the center is you have to cook a lunch yourself for staff and all the students, which means you're usually cooking for 70 and 80 people, and you get to do the whole lunch, plan the menu and everything. It's really excited on graduation day for anyone when that happens because they've learned blindness isn't going to keep me from doing stuff.
Do you know Brenda Mosby? Does that name ring a bell?
No.
She's my co-chair for the Colorado Cross Disability Coalition. She has low vision, I believe. And that's a person that if you remind me, I will email intro. I think you would really enjoy meeting with Brenda, who has a lot of your experiences and philosophies. And I think she would be an important person for you to get connected with in Colorado.
Sure. Everything else, we could get her on the podcast.
She would she would be great on the podcast.
Always looking for guests. So anybody who has a person you think we ought to have on the
Brenda would be a
podcast,
great guest, be a
we're,
wonderful guest for you.
we're always looking. So anybody listening, if you've got a thought for a guest, we want to hear from you. But that's great. I'd love to meet her. And again, when we're going to be in Colorado, we'll work that out. I think it'll be a lot of fun to do. But I think that for the most part, we really do need to recognize that what people think about us is not necessarily the way reality really is.
Yeah, I mean, people's misperceptions of people with intellectual disabilities, as an example, if they're not connected to someone, they don't realize the full value and contribution that someone like my son can make. Once they get to know him and his personality and his sense of humor and the things he enjoys,
Yeah.
his ability to verbal communication is a little tough for him because of some physical features.
Yeah.
Sometimes accompany Down syndrome, but you can misestimate what his real intelligence level is because of the verbal thing.
But I will bet he's not shy about voicing his opinion or articulating where he can.
He's not shy at all. In fact, he's kind of like the life of the party, and he loves to give speeches, and he is not embarrassed at all to be in front of thousands of people and get the microphone and express his opinions.
What's the difference between an intellectual and a developmental disability?
Well, they describe two things. Intellectual is around developmental is around the various stages of development, crawling, walking, the typical developmental phases of early childhood.
Mm-hmm. What are, would you say, some of the best industries? I'll be interested to hear your answer to this. Some of the best industries that are suited to support or employ persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
I would say every industry.
There you go. That's what I was hoping you'd say.
Industry that, we tend to think of certain industries, the general public, but I'm telling you, every industry can have people with IDD work in that industry and be productive, contributing members. I don't care whether it's tech or aerospace or the military or every single energy, retail, groceries, every single industry can have productive employees who have IDD and productive employees who have any form of so-called disability.
Yeah, and I think that's really the right answer. Why should we be limited?
Well, we're limited due to misperception.
Yeah, that's my point.
Due to lack of understanding, lack of awareness, lack of connection. And it's not always particularly the fault of these industries, because unless you have a personal connection, you may not have had the opportunity to become aware of who people really are. It's the same experience African Americans had back in the day and still have today, that women have had and still have today, that gays have had and still have today, that there's a lack of understanding of so-called, diverse communities, that with understanding and connect, all of that goes away. All of that goes away.
With all of the things that are going on today in society, and I think in so many ways we are losing the art of conversation and so on, do you think that's making the opportunities and the whole potential for having the conversations that we're talking about tougher?
Yeah, these kinds of conversations can be tough, because people aren't familiar with them, and these are new concepts. And one has to set aside some biases, in a lot of cases, unconscious biases, that again, with connections and awareness and direct contact, a lot of this stuff goes away
Yeah.
because you get to know who they are as
Because you
a
get to
being.
know. Yeah.
There's
You
no
discover it's,
substitute for literally being in a room with somebody or on the phone with somebody and getting to know them.
you discover that what you thought isn't really the way it is.
That is correct. That's absolutely correct.
Well, I want to thank you for being here with us and taking the time to chat with us about ARC, about disabilities in general. Of course, needless to say, it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. If people want to reach out to you and talk or
They
learn
can
more about ARC, how do they do that?
they can email me at Lewis, Lewis, at arcthrift.com, arcthrift.com. On my cell phone, 720-206-7047. Just say you heard this on this program.
There you go. Well, I hope people will do it. I hope people will reach out and that people will be more now stimulated and more knowledgeable about disabilities than they were before they came. I think that it's extremely important and that they will help promote the conversation. And we'll have to work on getting the Property Brothers to come on to Unstoppable Mindset Days. I think that'll be fun.
Let's contact those guys.
Yeah, Jonathan and Drew Scott.
Wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed getting to know you and have this conversation. And I think I learned a hell of a lot more from you than you learned from me.
I'm not sure about that. I always love to think
I
I've
don't
learned
know.
a
There's
lot.
a lot of wisdom in what you've said.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I think we both learned a lot, which is the way it should be. I feel that if I'm not learning on these podcasts, then I'm not doing a good job, and I always find ways to learn. So that's
Please
the way
send
it
me a
ought to be.
copy of this podcast. This is going to be one of my favorite podcasts.
You will definitely get it. Well, thank you. And I want to thank you all for being here and listening to us. Love thoughts, please feel free to email me at Michael H.I., Michaelhi at accessibe.com, or go to our podcast page at www.michaelhingson.com/podcast. Michael Hingson is MichaelHingson.com. And I should have said, and will now say, that we met Lloyd through Sheldon Lewis at Accessibe. You know Sheldon.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. I very much enjoyed this.
Well, thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. And let's do it again.
Please do it again. More to learn. Please, let's do it again.
Absolutely. Well, cool. Well, this was fun. The head of the Colorado Center is a woman named Julie Deaton, Dedan. You might ask Brenda if she knows her.
I'll bet she does. And do an email intro of me to her.
I will.
I'd love to go check out the center.
I think there's a lot of synergy that you guys could find exists, and I think it would make a lot of sense to do.
And I will introduce you to Brenda. She's someone you need to meet.
Works for me.
Okay, thanks, Michael.
You be well.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.